And joining us now for the first of 5 consecutive appearances here on the agenda all this week, Jeremy Rifkin from the Foundation on Economic Trends. He's the author of a new book called The Empathic Civilization and comes to us from the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania. It's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for agreeing to spend so much time with us. As I suggested, we're going to take 5 appearances out of your life all over the course of this week from Monday to Friday, talking about the promise and problems of progress. So let's start there. Perhaps just to make sure we're all on the same page, you can define that word as you understand it, and then we'll go from there.
Well, you know, this idea of progress is a relatively new concept. For most of history, human beings had no sense of progress. For example, if you go back to our forager-hunter days, forager-hunters, of course, they had their consciousness was mythological, and they went with the changing seasons. So every year there was a birth, a death of the seasons, and they started over again. It's what anthropologists call the eternal return. So nothing really changed from season to season, and there was no sense of progress, just a continuation of the past.
Get to the end of each day, basically.
Absolutely, and then you start all over again with a new year. When we went to the great hydraulic agricultural civilizations, when they built those big, huge irrigation systems, and we went to concentrated agriculture.
So what years are we talking now?
We're talking here the beginning in Mesopotamia around 4000 BC. Okay. And with the great hydraulic agricultural civilizations, cereal grain became the prime energy, barley, wheat, etc. And of course they had to create writing to manage the complexities of these great civilizations, and thinking changed to theological consciousness. All the great religions were formed at that time. Judaism, the people of the book, based on writing, Buddhism in India, Confucianism in China. So these great hydraulic civilizations, they went from mythological to theological consciousness. They didn't have an idea of progress, but they did have an idea that there was salvation in the next world to come. You had to suffer in this world, accept your plight, and then you would get some kind of a utopian vision, salvation in the world after death.
And do they understand that concept of progress there, but not necessarily
Not
here?
there, because once you are in paradise, there's no progress, it's all perfect.
Oh, okay.
There's no linear progression. The idea of progress really emerged with the first Industrial Revolution and the Enlightenment philosophy in the late 18th, early 19th century. At that point, we had another convergence of communication energy. The print revolution became very cheap. We introduced mass public schooling in Europe and America, and a print literate workforce began to organize a new energy regime called coal and steam power. When that came together, all of a sudden, people's ways of life improved because they took all that stored sun, the fossil fuels, the coal, etc., and they created tremendous wealth. So now the idea started to germinate that, my gosh, we're doing better every day. We seem to be accumulating wealth. And now, instead of looking up at the heavens for salvation in the next world, people started talking about creating utopian visions of material progress in this world. And that's where the Enlightenment philosophers came in, John Locke, Adam Smith, Rene Descartes, and they redefined human nature, the meaning of the human journey, to suggest that our primary nature is that we want to be autonomous, we are material self-interested, we're utilitarian, and the more wealth we accumulate, the more happiness we have, the more progress we make. And of course, that's kept with us all the way really until the 20th and 21st century.
So this concept is a couple of hundred years old, 200 or 300 years old. That's
very, very new. And it really depended on the idea that once people could break from the cycles of nature and begin to accumulate wealth beyond just what you could keep on your back, once that happened, we started to really think, well, you know what, we must be actually improving our lot in life. And it really works itself out in 2 ways. The more wealth people accumulated, the more they thought they were invulnerable and immortal. And then we introduced this new time value called efficiency. That really helped define progress. And efficiency is maximizing your output with the minimum time, labor, energy as inputs. As people became more efficient, they thought, well, gee, we're saving time. We're not going to die. And the more efficient we could become, the more wealth we could accumulate, the more we thought we were going to live on forever.
Let me go out in a bit of a tangent here for a second, because I love the story you tell about how efficiency is a very important thing when it comes to making progress in most things in life except romance. Maybe efficiency there is not what you want.
You've done your homework. Well, no, that's very interesting because, you know, we really do define our life as maximizing our output with a minimum input of labor, energy, and capital. But we would never treat someone we really care for efficiently. We'd never say to our loved one or our children or a good friend, I love you, so I'm going to maximize my output with a minimum input of my own time, labor, and energy and capital. That would be considered barbarous, really. Yet that is how most of our day is organized. And the reason is the more efficient we become, the more we believe we're overcoming time and saving time, and the longer we're going to live. It's kind of a utopian vision or a heavenly vision on earth that we are never going to die. And the problem, however, is that when we treat someone efficiently, it may sound like progress, but then everyone becomes instrumental to some outcome. Nobody's an end in themselves. They become instrumental to just production. And when that takes over, we lose the deep sense of solidarity and sociability that binds people together.
Yeah, romance can't work that way, can it?
Well, I don't see how it's possible to be intimate in an efficient manner, although maybe some of your viewers will probably send in some emails on this. I don't see how one can have revelation or a sense of joy, a sense of engagement in the most intimate sense if we're always trying to be efficient. It doesn't work. You need to have open-ended time. You have to transcend instrumental efficient time. So we've defined progress in a kind of a very mechanistic way in the last 2 centuries, and then we wake up every day and wonder why we're stressed, why we don't feel happy, why we feel we're on a treadmill, and if anything, we don't feel like we're progressing in some linear way, and in fact, we feel like we're, in a sense, narrowing our horizons rather than broadening them.
Okay, but having said that, this notion of the Protestant work ethic, which certainly much of this country, certainly English Canada was founded on, your country was founded on, Great Britain was founded on, that is still considered, that may go back centuries, but that is still considered a very desirable thing, to have that Protestant work ethic. Otherwise, we don't get ahead in the world.
Well, it's interesting you mention that, because that was the precursor to the modern idea of progress. You know, the Catholic Church was very clear. There was no progress in terms of the Catholic Church. You're born in sin, and you accept your lot in life, and you create a pious life, and you wait, and it's a waiting period till you have salvation with Christ in the next world. The Protestant Reformation kind of shifted gears, because Luther and Calvin said you're elected or damned at birth. No matter, you can't do good works. It's not a report card. God isn't giving you a report card. If you do good works, you're going to go to heaven. That was the Catholic idea. The Protestant Reformation said you're elected or damned at birth. Well, then people said, well, how do we know if we're elected or damned? We can't spend our whole life stressed out that we're not going to make it. So Luther said, well, you have to take your calling in life, whatever it is, and do the best you can. And then Calvin said you have to improve your calling in life. It won't get you to heaven, but it may assuage your doubts as to whether you've been elected or not. So this is where that idea of the industrious person came in. Be of good character, be industrious, always improve your lot in life. And that Protestant Reformation idea led to the industrial age, and the idea that if one is efficient and productive and industrious, one can enjoy the good life on earth. So the Protestant Reformation kind of laid the groundwork for the ideological age that came after it and the Industrial Revolution.
But that's still in place today. That
Absolutely.
Protestant work ethic is still with us, and geez, now I'm having a mental blank here, but we had a guest on this program, Walter Russell Mead, had a guest on this program a couple of years ago on a book that he wrote, which suggested that we ought to get down on the ground and thank our lucky stars here in Canada and the United States that we were, that we were colonized by Great Britain rather than, say, Spain or Portugal, because if you look at some of their former colonies, we're doing way better than them.
Well, it depends on how you perceive the good life, and that is, there's a very different idea about progress in continental Europe than we might have in Britain and the United States.
We'll talk about this more later in the week, for sure. But
but I'll just preface it by saying I think Canadians are closer to the continental European vision of progress in the good life. I think Brits and Americans, we're much more into you live to work, you don't work to live. Now, there's something to be said for that in terms of getting ahead, but when you're old and gray like me and look back at life, we don't believe that all the good moments is when we were more industrious, more productive, more efficient, more instrumental, more competitive. Those aren't what we look back at and think are important. It's when we have a moment where we have intimacy, a sense of connection, a sense of transcending ourselves, a sense of belonging to communities and meaning, and that has nothing to do with being productive, efficient, instrumental, or industrious.
Okay, two follow-ups on that. Number one, it's true. Nobody ever sat on their deathbed and thought, geez, I wish I'd spent more time at the office. That's the old story,
That's
right?
what my wife always says. She reminds me of this all the time.
And second is, what do you mean old and gray? How old are you?
65.
No kidding.
Absolutely.
Okay, you picked your
They
parents
did a
well.
good makeup job on me today.
Well, Diane is an excellent makeup artist.
She did great.
But you picked your
I didn't
parents well.
recognize myself afterwards.
Okay, let's move along here. The first industrial revolution, late 18th century. How does that start to, perhaps you can embellish on that a bit more. How does that help us understand the notion of progress?
Well, when we were able to bring together a new energy revolution, coal, and bring it together with the print technology revolution, it really did begin to change things, because all of a sudden we weren't subject to the vagaries of the changing seasons. You know, wealth was something that only a handful of people at the top had before that. The emperors, the monarchs, the kings and queens. Most people lived the same way for eons of history. They lived in hovels. They had absolutely no surplus. There was no accumulation of wealth. So your daily rounds were pretty much the same in the 1700s as they might have been in the 4th century. They didn't really change. Progress was just not something that made any sense. But when we started digging up that coal, which was stored sun, and applying steam power and managing with print technology, all of a sudden wealth started accumulating. Everybody became wealthy. By the 19th century, there were working people that were as well off as aristocrats might have been 2 centuries earlier. So we had this notion, we must be making progress.
But little did we know we were actually killing the planet in the process.
Well, that's the downside. It's quite ironic that as we thought we were developing toward our own perfection, we are undermining the ecosystems of this biosphere, which would lead to now, the 21st century, to the potential of the extinction of the human race. Our scientists are saying we may actually be on the cusp of that. So we created all this wealth. We had this fantasy that it was something that was invulnerable, that our wealth was going to be here forever, when in fact we were using up the largesse of this planet so quickly that future generations may not have their time and their moment on Earth.
And we will pursue that idea more on Wednesday's program. Let's finish up in our last few minutes for today on this. On the one hand, we have this faith-based progress. On the other hand, the conception of progress as the ever-increasing application of reason. And these two forces, I guess, have kind of been at loggerheads for many, many centuries. So how has that debate shaped our belief in progress over the years?
Well, the debate really began back at in the medieval era. St. Thomas Aquinas had to deal with this whole question of how do you balance faith and reason? Because, with the beginning of Christianity for the first 9 centuries in the Dark Ages, it was all about faith. People lived in these feudal societies, and they had faith that life would be better in the next world to come with Christ. But then around the 11th and 12th century, economic activity started to pick up in Europe, and the cities started to emerge. And the beginning of a proto-industrial revolution started with windmill and watermill technology. People started to do a little bit better in life, and they started to use rational thinking to create all these new technologies that were bettering their life. So all of a sudden, people were having a wrestling contest between, do I believe in faith or do I believe in reason?
Is this just the elites, or this was
the elites?
Mostly elites. Yeah.
And of course, reason was allowing them to improve their conditions. So St. Thomas Aquinas had to do some mental acrobatics to try to balance them. What he said is, it's okay to have reason. Reason's part of what God gave us so that we could understand where we fit in the greater scheme of things in God's creation. But reason only gives you an idea of God's great universe. If there's a struggle between reason and faith, reason has to be rethought, because it always has to accommodate faith. Because faith is what ultimately our being is all about. By the industrial age, faith had given way to some extent to reason, and Rene Descartes and Isaac Newton and John Locke and Adam Smith, the Enlightenment philosophers, said, we are Homo sapien. We are a rational, calculating, detached, utilitarian, self-interested, competitive, materialistic creature. That's our real nature. So we have not fallen from grace. We become gods on earth. We create our own heaven here in our daily lives.
And you refute much of that idea in this, which we will talk about again in the days ahead. I'm so glad we've got 5 days, because we've certainly got at least 5 days of material to cover here. Jeremy Rifkin from the Foundation on Economic Trends, his newest book, The Empathic Civilization. Come back and see us again tomorrow when we talk more about technological progress, okay?
Will do.
Thanks very much.